Today, we're diving into a story that has stirred intense debate across Europe, sparked heated discussions in political circles, and captured global attention. Denmark's recent move, controversial, bold, and unexpected, has left the European Union scrambling to interpret the consequences and reevaluate its own internal strategies. In this video, we're going to break down what Denmark actually did, why it matters, and why the reaction across the EU has been described by many analysts as borderline panic. This script will walk you through the background, the impact, and the wider geopolitical ripple effects in a clear, balanced, and thoughtful way. To understand why Denmark's step caused such a strong reaction, we first need to look at the broader tension that has been slowly building within the European Union. Over the past few years, disagreements over migration, security, energy policy, and economic governance have become increasingly visible. The EU is a bloc built on unity, but unity has not always been easy to maintain, especially when member states feel pressure to act in ways that conflict with Brussels' expectations. Denmark's recent decision tapped directly into that pressure, making clear the delicate balance the EU has been trying to maintain. Denmark has always been a slightly different kind of EU member cooperative, but proudly independent on certain issues. Its opt-outs from EU rules in areas like defense and justice have given it more room to maneuver than many other states. But this new move went a step further. It signaled that Denmark was willing to break with EU norms in a way that caught nearly everyone off guard, from policymakers in Brussels to analysts watching from around the world. It wasn't just the nature of the decision, but the timing and the message attached to it that made it so shocking. At the heart of the tension was Denmark's calculation that national interests had to come first. Whether the issue involved border management, energy independence, defense commitments, or internal regulatory changes, the message was the same. Denmark was ready to prioritize its own stability, even if it meant challenging EU expectations. That kind of message is always controversial inside the bloc because it raises uncomfortable questions. If one country can take such a bold step, could others follow? Could the unity of the EU weaken? These were the questions circulating through European institutions almost immediately. While some European leaders responded with carefully measured statements, the undertone was unmistakably serious. There was concern that Denmark's decision could inspire other member states to rethink their commitments. The EU is built on coordinated policy. When even one country breaks from that pattern, it creates a ripple effect that reaches far beyond its borders. Analysts pointed out that the EU internal cohesion has been tested many times before, but this moment felt different because it touched on a topic that was already sensitive and politically charged. The public reaction across European media was rapid. Commentators began offering predictions about the potential long-term consequences. Some argued that Denmark's move reflected a broader shift happening across Europe, where national governments feel increasingly pressure to act decisively in the face of economic or security uncertainty. Others worried that if Denmark's approach became a trend, it could weaken the EU ability to coordinate policies effectively. What made the situation even more complex was that Denmark defended its position as a necessary step, not a rebellious one. This sparked even deeper debate about the balance between national sovereignty and the responsibilities of EU membership. Inside Denmark, the government emphasized that the decision aligned with national priorities. Officials argued that while they valued their role in the EU, they could not ignore the challenges facing the country. The emphasis was on protecting Danish citizens and ensuring long-term stability. To many Danes, the step was a sign of responsible governance. But to many in Brussels, it was a warning sign. The tension between national interests and collective European policy has always existed, but this particular issue exposed the fragility of that balance more clearly than before. As the EU began discussions on how to respond, it became clear that their options were limited. Pressuring Denmark too heavily could backfire, triggering more resistance. Responding too softly might send the signal that similar moves would be tolerated. This delicate situation placed the EU in an incredibly difficult position. The bloc had to find a way to reinforce unity without escalating the situation unnecessarily. Behind closed doors, intense discussions took place, with diplomats working hard to craft a response that could prevent further division. Meanwhile, international observers outside Europe watched closely. Whenever a major EU member state takes an unexpected step, it affects global markets, geopolitical alliances, and negotiations with other major powers. Denmark's decision was no exception. Analysts in the United States, Asia, and the Middle East examined the move for clues about Europe's future stability. Some saw it as a sign of internal strain. Others viewed it as a predictable outcome of the pressures facing many Western democracies. Regardless of interpretation, the event proved that decisions made by small countries can sometimes have big consequences. Inside Europe, public opinion was divided. Some people admired Denmark's assertiveness and saw it as a necessary act of leadership. They believed that EU rules should adapt to the realities faced by member states rather than the other way around. Others worried that such unilateral actions could weaken the Union over time. What began as a single policy decision had rapidly evolved into a broader conversation about the nature and future of the EU itself. As the days passed, politicians and analysts debated how far reaching Denmark's step might be. Could it influence EU internal negotiations? Would other countries see this as a model? Could it spark calls for reform within the EU decision-making structure? These were no longer theoretical discussions. They were real questions facing European leadership. It was clear that the situation was not going to be resolved quickly. The EU would need time to evaluate the new reality and craft a long-term strategy. For Denmark, the aftermath was equally complex. While the government insisted that its decision was based on national needs, it also had to navigate the diplomatic consequences. Denmark's reputation as a cooperative EU member was at stake. Maintaining positive relations with Brussels would be essential, even as the country continued pursuing its own priorities. Danish leaders emphasized the importance of dialogue, hoping to prevent misunderstandings from escalating into deeper conflict. But beneath all these political exchanges lay a deeper issue: the growing tension within the EU between centralized decision-making and the desire of individual nations to preserve control over their policies. Denmark's move did not create this tension, it merely exposed it. Many experts believe that the EU will face more challenges like this in the coming years as the global landscape continues to shift. Economic pressures, migration patterns, technological competition, and security concerns all contribute to uncertainty. In such an environment, countries may feel compelled to act decisively, even if it means challenging EU expectations. The EU reaction, described by some commentators as panic, reflected more than just concern over Denmark. It reflected worry about the broader trend of fragmentation. After dealing with major events like Brexit, the EU is especially sensitive to any sign of internal divergence. Even though Denmark's step was nowhere near as drastic as leaving the Union, the symbolism mattered. It reminded Brussels that unity cannot be taken for granted, and that even long-standing members may push back if they feel national interests are at risk. In the weeks that followed, efforts to de-escalate the situation intensified. European officials avoided harsh language and focused on encouraging cooperation. Denmark, for its part, expressed willingness to engage in open dialogue. Both sides understood that maintaining a constructive relationship was essential. But even with these diplomatic gestures, the underlying concerns remained. As observers continued to analyze the situation, one common theme emerged: Europe is entering a period of adjustment. The challenges ahead require strong cooperation, but cooperation must also respect the realities faced by individual nations. Denmark's step served as an example of how complicated that balance has become. Whether the EU can adapt to these challenges will shape the future of the entire region. Despite the tension, there were also opportunities hidden within the crisis. Some analysts argued that Denmark's move could force the EU to modernize certain policies, making them more flexible and responsive. Others believed that this issue could spark deeper conversations about reforming EU decision-making mechanisms to better accommodate national differences. While the situation created uncertainty, it also opened the door to potential improvements. Throughout this period, media coverage often used dramatic language, calling the EU shaken, alarmed, or in panic. While such language captured attention, it is important to remember that the EU remains a resilient political structure. Disagreements among member states are not new. What made this case stand out was the timing and the sensitivity of the issue. With global pressures rising, even small disagreements can feel bigger than they are. The key question is how the EU and Denmark navigate the next steps. As tensions gradually settled, one thing became clear: this moment would leave a lasting impact. Denmark's decision would be studied in political science courses, debated in parliaments, and referenced in future negotiations. It was a reminder that even within a powerful union like the EU, national governments still hold significant influence. The balance between unity and sovereignty remains delicate, and events like this highlight the need for constant negotiation and adaptation. For the EU, the lesson was equally significant. Maintaining unity requires not just rules and agreements, but trust, communication, and responsiveness. When member states feel heard and supported, cooperation becomes easier. When they feel constrained or ignored, conflicts become more likely. Denmark's step brought these issues to the surface, providing the EU with an opportunity to strengthen its internal relationships. As the story continues to develop, observers will be watching closely to see how both sides move forward. Will the EU adjust its policies to address the concerns raised by Denmark? Will Denmark find common ground with other member states? Will this moment lead to lasting reform or simply fade into the background? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the conversation about Europe's future has been reignited. For viewers, this situation offers an important reminder about the complexity of international politics. Decisions made by governments are rarely simple. They involve competing interests, external pressures, and difficult trade-offs. Denmark's step illustrates how even a single policy decision can create ripple effects across an entire continent. It also shows how quickly political dynamics can shift, especially in times of global uncertainty. As we wrap up this explanation, remember that events like this are part of a larger story: Europe adapting to a changing world. Denmark's move may have sparked strong reactions, but it also opened the door for deeper conversation and reflection. Understanding these developments is essential for anyone interested in world politics, economics, or international relations. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the situation, make sure to stay connected for more clear, detailed, and balanced explanations of the biggest global events.